No one at the glass-walled offices of Skyline Corporation suspected anything when billionaire CEO Richard Hawthorne started acting differently, known for his sharp suits, back-to-back investor meetings, and a fortune that seemed untouchable. Richard was the kind of man whose time was measured in millions. Yet lately, his eyes lingered a little longer on things most people overlooked, especially her, Elena, his housemaid. She was quiet, efficient, and invisible, at least that's what everyone assumed. But Richard had started to notice things, like how she always refused tips, how she left early every Thursday, how she looked exhausted but never complained. And one day, when she declined a generous holiday bonus with a polite smile and a bowed head, something shifted inside him. That night, unable to shake a strange feeling, he did something he had never done before. He followed her. It wasn't hard. Elena took the subway, blending into the crowd like a shadow. Richard, in a hoodie and sunglasses, trailed her from a distance, feeling oddly out of place among the everyday commuters. As the train screeched through the underground, he felt a sense of suspense grow inside him, an emotion he hadn't felt since his early days building his empire. Why was he doing this? Curiosity? Guilt? Maybe it was the emptiness he hadn't admitted to anyone. But what he saw when she exited the station stunned him. Before we dive deeper into this journey, take a moment to support this channel. If you enjoy stories that touch the heart and inspire the soul, hit the like button, subscribe, and comment below where you're watching from. We love hearing your stories too. Elena didn't go home. She went to a rundown community center in a rough part of town. The building was crumbling, the lights flickered, and the paint peeled like it hadn't been touched in years. Richard stood behind a parked car, hidden, watching her walk inside with a bag of groceries. Moments later, the lights inside came on, and through a dusty window, he saw a group of children rush toward her. Their faces lit up not with hunger, but with love. She hugged them one by one. Then, to his disbelief, she pulled out snacks, notebooks, and what looked like handmade toys from her bag. "Today we're learning about courage," she said, her voice muffled, but clear enough. Richard took a step back, stunned. She was running a secret after-school program, for free, in a part of the city he'd only ever seen on the news. And she did it quietly, humbly, never asking for help, never using his money or name. He leaned against the wall, heart pounding. The woman he had dismissed as just a maid was saving lives in silence. What else didn't he know about her? The following night, Richard couldn't sleep. His penthouse was silent, luxurious, and cold. The marble floors echoed his every step as he walked aimlessly from room to room. He kept seeing Elena's face, lit with purpose as she read to the children. He kept hearing her voice, steady and warm. "Today, we're learning about courage." That sentence haunted him. Here he was, a man with more money than he could ever spend, feeling like the coward in her story. The next morning, he arrived at the office early, ignoring the mountain of emails waiting for him. His assistant noticed. "You okay, sir?" she asked. "Fine," he muttered. But his mind wasn't on stocks or contracts. It was with the woman who had taught him more in 1 hour than any board meeting ever had. Over the next week, Richard watched Elena closely, but not in the way he used to. He noticed the way she checked the fridge and made sure no food went to waste. How she paused by the window during storms, lost in thought. One evening, he asked her, "Why don't you ever take a vacation?" She hesitated, then smiled gently. "There's always someone who needs something more than I need rest." That hit him hard. Most people he knew bragged about their vacations in the Maldives or Aspen. Elena spoke like her time didn't belong to her, but to others. That night, once again, he followed her. This time she brought 2 bags, one with food, the other with books and crayons. The children greeted her like she was the sun, but something was different. There was a man outside the building, yelling at another volunteer. Richard stiffened. Elena stepped in calmly, diffusing the tension with a few firm but kind words. The man backed down, muttering, and walked away. Richard watched, awestruck. She wasn't just generous, she was brave, unshakable, a protector. He felt ashamed. All his wealth, and he'd never used it for something this pure. Elena didn't even know he was watching. She never tried to impress anyone. She was doing it for them, those kids who had nothing. And suddenly, for the first time in a long time, Richard felt small. What was he going to do about it? Richard couldn't shake the weight in his chest. It followed him into board meetings, hovered over him during phone calls with investors, and echoed in his ears even as he closed million-dollar deals. The face of that little girl hugging Elena. The boy with the cracked glasses who laughed like he hadn't laughed in days. The mural of dreams painted on the wall of the rundown center, where each child had drawn what they wanted to be. A doctor, a chef, a pilot. And in the middle of all that chaos was Elena, quiet, steady, present. She had something money couldn't buy. Something as rich as his name, his power had never given him. Purpose. And now, no matter how loud the world around him was, Richard only heard one question. Why have I done nothing? He started going back. Not just once, but every night. At first, he stayed hidden in the shadows, guilt riding shotgun. But as the nights passed, something began to shift. He started bringing things. Quietly, anonymously. Boxes of crayons left by the back door. Bags of fresh produce. A heater for the drafty hall. The staff at the center began whispering about a secret donor. Elena simply smiled, thankful, but unaware. One evening, he watched from a distance as she handed a girl a new pair of shoes. Someone kind gave these to us, she said softly. The girl beamed, and Richard swallowed a lump in his throat. He hadn't felt that kind of pride in years, but something else stirred within him, too, something unfamiliar. A longing not just to help, but to understand, to know what had shaped Elena into the woman she was. So one afternoon he asked her, Elena, can I ask you something personal? She looked up from folding towels, surprised, then nodded. Why do you do it? The center, the kids. Her eyes softened. Because no one did it for me, she whispered. I grew up in a place like that. People looked away. I promised myself I'd never be the one who turned my back. Her voice didn't tremble, but his heart did. The next day, he made a decision. For the first time in years, Richard canceled an entire week of meetings. His assistant nearly fainted. You going offline? He nodded. Something more important came up. That night, he didn't hide in the shadows. He walked right through the door of the center, wearing jeans, holding 2 pizza boxes, and a donation receipt for a new roof in his back pocket. The children stared. Elena froze. Richard, she whispered, confused. What are you? Helping, he replied simply. If that's okay with you. For a moment, no one moved. Then, a little boy tugged at his sleeve. Mister, are you rich? Richard glanced at Elena. I thought I was, he said, kneeling down. But maybe I'm just starting to be. Elena said nothing, but her eyes shimmered, and that said everything. Yet despite the warmth of that moment, something still felt unfinished. The children didn't know who their mystery donor was. Elena still carried the weight of it all. And Richard, he was starting to understand that money could build roofs, but not repair the broken paths of others. And what happened next would test whether his transformation was real or just another gesture from a rich man trying to ease his conscience. Days passed, and Richard became a quiet presence at the community center. He helped fix broken chairs, passed out snacks, and read to the younger kids with a softness that surprised even himself. The children began to look forward to his visits. They called him Mr. R, not knowing they were sitting beside a billionaire whose fortune could buy the entire neighborhood 10 times over. But it wasn't about money anymore. For the first time in his life, Richard wasn't trying to impress anyone. He wasn't negotiating, strategizing, or networking. He was just there, human, present. And every time he saw Elena laugh or comfort a child, or wipe a table long after everyone had left, something inside him healed a little more. But one evening, something happened that threatened to unravel it all. A local journalist doing a story on after-school programs in underprivileged areas showed up at the center. She noticed the sudden improvements, the new roof, the fresh paint, the donated supplies. She asked questions. Who's funding all of this? Elena, ever discreet, shrugged. Just someone who cares. But the reporter wasn't satisfied. The next morning, a photo appeared online. It showed Richard, sleeves rolled up, carrying books into the center. The headline read, Billionaire CEO found volunteering in inner-city community center. Why? The article went viral within hours. People praised him. Others accused him of seeking good PR. His company's stock rose. But inside, Richard felt hollow. This wasn't supposed to be about him. That night, when he arrived at the center, Elena was waiting outside. Her arms were crossed, her expression unreadable. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, her voice low. He paused. "I didn't want to change things. I did want it to be about my money." She looked away. "But it is about your money now. People will think we're a project, a publicity stunt." Her words stung more than she knew. "Do you think that's what this is?" he asked quietly. She didn't answer. Instead, she looked back at the building behind her. "Those kids, they've been used before. Don't let them hope for something that will disappear when the cameras go away." That night, Richard sat in his car for hours, staring at the reflection of his own face in the rearview mirror. He thought about his life, about boardrooms, penthouses, million-dollar yachts, and realized none of it ever made him feel the way he did watching a child learn to read. But now he had to decide. Was he willing to give up comfort, reputation, and control to do what was right? To make this real? Because the next step wouldn't just be about writing a check. It would require something he had never truly given before: himself. The next morning, Richard walked into Skyline Corporation not as a CEO, but as a man with a mission. He didn't greet anyone. He didn't sit at his glass desk or look over numbers on a screen. Instead, he called an emergency board meeting. The room filled with confused executives. "Is there a merger?" one asked. "A scandal?" another whispered. Richard stood at the head of a long marble table, his posture calm but firm. "There's no crisis," he began. "But there is a decision to be made, one that'll define the future of this company." The board leaned in. He continued, "We've invested in tech, in real estate, in markets across the globe, but we've never truly invested in people. That changes today." Gasps followed. "What do you mean?" a board member asked. Richard took a deep breath. "I'm creating a division, fully funded, dedicated to social impact, real work, real change, starting with the center Elena runs." One woman frowned. "But she's your maid." Richard nodded. "She's also one of the strongest, most impactful human beings I've ever met. And if any of you had seen what I've seen, you'd understand. That center is doing more for the future than half our portfolio." Silence fell. Then came the pushback. "We can't afford to prioritize charity. This could damage our brand. It's too risky." Richard looked each of them in the eye. "Then take me off the brand." "I don't care." Back at the center, Elena stood alone, sweeping the floor. She hadn't seen Richard since their conversation outside. A part of her feared he'd walk away like everyone else had before. She told herself it didn't matter. She had the kids. She had the mission. But her heart told a different story, one of disappointment and quiet hope. Then she heard footsteps. She turned and saw him. No suit, no entourage, just Richard, holding a folder and a hesitant smile. "I'm messed up," he said. "I never wanted this to be about me. But I realized that staying hidden isn't the same as staying humble. You were right, Elena. If I want to help, really help, I have to do it fully, with integrity." He handed her the folder. Inside were documents. Full funding for the center, scholarships for the kids, renovation plans, and a nonprofit status to protect them long term. "This isn't charity," he said softly. "It's partnership. If you'll have me." Elena's eyes welled with tears. "You didn't have to do all this." Richard stepped closer. "But I did. Not because I'm rich, but because for once I want to be useful." The next day, workers arrived. Painters, electricians, tutors, counselors. Not to change what Elena had built, but to strengthen it. And as the kids ran through the newly lit halls, laughing and learning, something magical unfolded. But one moment, still, would change everything. Because one child had a secret Richard was about to uncover. And it would lead to the most unexpected, heart-shaking twist of all. It was a Thursday afternoon when Richard noticed her, quiet, always in the back row, barely speaking. Her name was Maya, a small girl with deep eyes and a worn-out backpack she never took off. Unlike the others, she didn't laugh easily or run up to him with joy. She watched, listened, and something in her silence tugged at him. After class, as the other children swarmed around the volunteers, Maya sat alone by the window, scribbling in a notebook. Richard walked over gently. "Hey there," he said, kneeling beside her. "What are you writing?" She paused, hesitating, then slowly turned the notebook toward him. It was a drawing, rough, with crayons nearly out of wax, but clear enough. It showed a hospital bed, a woman smiling weakly, and beside her Maya, holding her hand. Richard swallowed hard. "Is that your mom?" he asked. Maya nodded. "She's sick, real sick. But I didn't want to tell Miss Elena. She already does too much." Richard looked at the child in front of him. So young, yet carrying the weight of the world. "Where is she now?" he asked softly. "At home. I try to get there before the nurse leaves. But sometimes I'm late." That night, Richard followed Maya. Not out of curiosity, but concern. She walked fast, past cracked sidewalks and flickering streetlights, until she reached a small apartment building. The place was old, barely standing. When they reached the door, she hesitated. "You don't have to come," she said. "It's not nice like your places." Richard knelt beside her. "Maya, you never have to hide the truth from me, ever." She opened the door. Inside was a dimly lit room, smelling of medicine and old wood. Her mother lay on a thin mattress, pale and coughing. The nurse gave Richard a wary glance. "We do what we can," she said, "but she needs treatment, real treatment, which they can't afford." Maya sat beside her mother, holding her hand. "I told you I'd be back in time," she whispered. Her mother smiled faintly. "Always my brave girl." Richard stepped back, heart pounding. He'd seen balance sheets with losses bigger than what Maya needed. But this wasn't business. This was life. This was urgency. Without hesitation, he called his private doctor, then his legal team. Within 2 hours, her mother was transferred to a private hospital room, fully covered. Maya didn't understand at first. "Why are you helping us?" she asked, her voice trembling. Richard knelt beside her again. "Because you matter, Maya. Your life matters. And I've wasted too much time not seeing that." Elena arrived shortly after, breathless, eyes wide. "What's going on?" she asked. Richard explained everything. She looked at him, really looked, and for the first time, smiled without reservation. "You've changed," she said softly. He nodded. "No, you changed me." But as Maya's mother stabilized, Richard realized this was bigger than a one-time act of kindness. This was the beginning of something lasting, something real. The sun had just begun to rise when Richard found himself standing on the rooftop of his penthouse, staring out over the sprawling city that once felt like his kingdom. The skyline, once a symbol of his empire, now looked different. Less like a trophy, more like a call. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Dozens of messages. News outlets wanted interviews. Investors wanted reassurance. His assistant had left 5 voicemails about a potential international merger. But none of it mattered now. Not in the way it used to. What mattered was the decision that weighed on his chest like iron. Should he step away from it all? Could he let go of the empire he'd built to follow a purpose far greater? Later that day, Richard walked into the community center holding a sealed envelope. Elena greeted him with a warm nod, and Maya ran up to hug him tightly. The center was alive, children laughing, volunteers working, the smell of fresh paint and books filling the air. He waited until the afternoon, when the last child had gone home, before pulling Elena aside. "I need you to read this," he said, handing her the envelope. She opened it slowly, eyes scanning the letter inside. It was his resignation from the company, from the title, from the corporate world that had defined him for decades. "I'm donating 60% of my shares," he explained. "They'll fund education programs, healthcare access, and centers like this one everywhere. You'll help lead it, if you'll say yes." Elena stared at him, stunned. "But this is everything you built." He smiled gently. "No, everything I built was empty. This is the first thing that feels real." Her voice cracked. "Richard, are you sure?" He stepped closer. "I've never been more sure of anything." News broke within hours. Headlines exploded. Billionaire CEO steps down to fund community projects. From fortune to foundation. Richard Hawthorne's stunning move. Some called him foolish. Others called him brave. But Richard didn't care. For the first time in his life, he didn't feel the need to prove anything. The next week, the center reopened under a new name, the Elena Foundation, in honor of the woman who changed his life. Maya's mother recovered steadily, and Maya, for the first time, began to draw pictures of herself smiling. Children from neighborhoods he had never even heard of began flooding in. drawn by the warmth and resources the center now provided. And Richard? He swept floors. He packed lunches. He taught lessons about kindness and resilience. Sometimes the kids still asked, "Weren't you like super rich?" He would grin. "I had a lot of money, but now I'm finally wealthy." The journey hadn't been about saving others. It had been about discovering what needed saving inside himself. Months passed, and the Elena Foundation became more than just a local project. It became a movement. What started as one humble community center turned into a network of safe havens across the country. Word spread quickly. Parents wrote letters. Teachers volunteered. Retired professionals offered their time. Children once forgotten were now seen, heard, and uplifted. But what touched Richard the most wasn't the numbers. It was the moments, the small things. A boy who had never read a book, now writing stories of his own. A teenager who used to sleep in a car, now leading art workshops for younger kids. A young girl who once hid in the shadows, now reciting poetry in front of a crowd, her voice full of power. These weren't just outcomes, they were miracles born from compassion and choice. One rainy afternoon, Richard sat beside Elena in the center's new library, watching as Maya helped a new volunteer organize shelves. "She's blossomed," Elena said softly. "I barely recognize her." Richard smiled. "You gave her roots. All I did was water the ground." Elena turned to him, a spark in her eyes. "You know that's not true." He looked down. "Maybe not, but I never imagined my second act would look like this." She placed a hand gently on his. "This isn't your second act, Richard. This is the real beginning." Their eyes met, and in that silence was something unspoken: gratitude, respect, maybe even something deeper. Later that evening, as Richard was locking up the center, he found an envelope taped to the door. It was for Maya. Inside was a crayon drawing of the center, with him, Elena, and all the children holding hands beneath a bright sun. On the back, a single sentence: "Thank you for choosing to see us." Richard held the paper close, overwhelmed by the simplicity and the depth of those words. All his life he had been seen, but never really known. Maya's note reminded him of how far he'd come, and how far there still was to go. Weeks later, at a national education summit, Richard stood on stage, not as a CEO, not as a public figure, but as a servant to something greater. "We built walls to protect our fortunes," he said, "but it's time we build bridges to protect our future." The room erupted in applause, but it wasn't for him. It was for the cause, for the children, for the new definition of wealth he had helped introduce to the world. And as the lights dimmed and he walked off stage, Richard knew one truth with absolute clarity. He didn't follow Elena home by accident. He was being led back to himself. Because in following Elena home, he didn't just uncover her secret, he found his soul. Sometimes the richest people are the ones who give the most of their time, their heart, and their purpose. What will you choose to give today? If this story touched your heart, don't forget to give this video a like, subscribe to our channel, share this video, and tell us in the comments. What part of Elena's and Richard's journey moved you the most? There's another story waiting for you, and it might just change the way you see the world. Thank you so much for watching. See you soon.